It's time for some off-the-radar, low-budget fun with Low Budget Binge. Let's get started. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Bad Ben is streaming on Tubi and on the Bad Ben website, which is listed down below. It's directed, written, and starring Nigel Bach. Every time I visit Tubi, it seems there are quite a few options from the ongoing found footage series Bad Ben, so I decided to bite the bullet and check this series out. So every week for the foreseeable future, I'm going to check out a different movie in the Bad Ben series, and there's a lot of them. In the first Bad Ben movie, a guy named Tom Riley, writer-director Nigel Bach, purchases a home from a police auction in hopes to flip it for a big profit. Arriving at the home, Tom sees that the home is in good condition and fully furnished, as if the occupants picked up and left overnight. Tom activates the offline security system and captures escalating paranormal phenomenon in and around the house, all pointing back to something awful in a locked room in the basement. Okay, I'm a big fan of DIY horror. Seeing aspiring filmmakers pull up their bootstraps and make a movie without a lot of technical knowledge, or even money to do it, is appealing to me because I know they are making these movies for the absolute love of the genre. But I'm also a realist. I know it's pretty easy to make a found footage film of this kind. So while I admire the sheer gumption Nigel Bach shows in making not only this film, but a seemingly endless series of sequels to it, I don't want to heap the praise on it either too much because this is the epitome of bare-bones filmmaking. Basically, Bad Ben is a series of security cam footage and handheld phone camera footage of your dad pittering around the house, assessing damages and fixing things, and walking around in the night in his boxers. Bach is the only actor in the movie, so if following around a middle-aged bald man griping on the phone and attempting to track down strange noises sounds like a drag to you, you're going to want to skip Bad Ben. But I'm not going to do that. Yes, this film ends with the most cliched found footage trope since the Up-Nose Confessional, but I'm honestly curious to see where this series is going to go. If Bad Ben does anything right, it has laid the groundwork for a lot of weird happenings occurring in and around the house. There are baby graves, locked up knives, secret rooms, pentagrams in the attic, and shadows lurking outside. It may not be reinventing the found footage wheel, but I didn't hate the time I spent with the first Bad Ben. Next week, we look at Bad Ben, Steelmanville Road, which is where the house resides upon, the first sequel of the series. Wish me luck. Jack in the Box Awakening is new on demand and digital download from 4 Digital Media. It's directed and written by Lawrence Fowler. A well-to-do woman named Olga, played by Nicola Wright, is on the brink of death and acquires an antique box that, when opened, releases a demon that grants you your deepest desire. But there's a cost. The box requires 6 souls in order to grant the wish. Wishing that she overcomes her illness, Olga lures those working for her to open the box and get munched up by the demon. Unfortunately for Amy, played by Molly Hindle, it's her first day of work, and her turn to meet the Jack-in-the-Box is coming soon. I reviewed the first Jack-in-the-Box film a short while ago and found it to lack inspiration. In fact, I remember being very disappointed at the lack of new and fresh ideas at every turn. I also went the extra mile and tossed out some scenarios that would have made the film so much better. Now, I would never go so far as to say anyone should listen to one reviewer's opinion, and while none of my suggestions were taken in making this sequel, it seems at least the filmmaker, Lawrence Fowler, decided to tweak things a bit to make it more of an interesting watch. Now, I don't want to oversell Jack in the Box Awakening, but I do think it's a better movie than the original, also directed and written by Fowler. mainly because there seems to be a more interesting concept at the center of it. Basically, the Jack in the Box is a genie in a bottle concept, or even a leprechaun-style character who grants wishes for a deadly price. Not the most original concept, but at least it makes more sense than the original. The stakes are simplified and made much clearer in the sequel, but that doesn't really mean they're more interesting. The acting is better. Nicola Wright is decent as the elderly woman, as she clearly shows how black a heart she has and how she wishes to retain her life at all costs. Molly Hindle is capable as the good girl in trouble, but not really given much to do other than be innocent. The best performance of Awakening is from Matt McClure as Olga's son Edgar, who is dedicated to his mother despite acknowledging the horror of what she is making him unleash on others. This is a nuanced role, and McClure conveys that role well. The Jack-in-the-Box design itself is simply uninspired. It looks like a costume rejected from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. If you have a deathly fear of clowns, I guess you might find him creepy, but he just kind of saunters around and towards the camera. As with the original, he doesn't do much but pop out of the box and snatch people, leaving bloody puddles in its wake. I almost feel that the giant walking clown suit should be scrapped in favor of the truly haunting look of the toy clown that pops up originally. The vacant stare of the toy is creepy, and could make for some truly scary scenes. Even if the clown is immobile, it's still scarier than the walking, stalking clown with a smile. While I do feel Awakening is an improvement over the original, I still can't recommend this film simply because it's more capably made and more focused than the previous entry. In the end, it's an okay redux of Hellraiser, Leprechaun, Wishmaster. Not a bad idea, but not necessarily an original one either. Coming Home in the Dark is new on Netflix from Dark Sky Films. It's directed by James Ashcroft and written by James Ashcroft, Eli Kent, and Owen Marshall. A family run into a pair of drifters while vacationing in New Zealand. When the two drifters assault the family at gunpoint, it's revealed that the paths of these two drifters and the patriarch of the family, Alan, played by Eric Thompson, have crossed before. Alan must now confront the sins of his past he thought were long behind him. In many ways, Coming Home in the Dark is a top-tier quality movie. The acting across the board is good, especially Thompson as Alan, who harbors a lot of guilt and repressed rage for the entire film, and the way lead drifter Mandrake, played by Daniel Giles, restrains himself and speaks politely despite doing horrific acts is truly haunting. Miriam McDowell also delivers a strong turn as Alan's wife, Jill, and while he has very few lines, the second drifter, Tubbs, played by Mateus Lafutu, makes every second on screen feel like he's going to go on a blood-soaked rampage. There are extremely tense scenes throughout where Alan and his family attempt to escape from these two drifters. The directing is tight, the action is well communicated, and the script does a decent job of communicating how dire the entire situation is for the family in peril. That said, Coming Home in the Dark teeters on a premise that is morally whopper-jawed. In order to talk about it, I have to reveal some spoilers, but I do feel the need to talk about it, so you've been warned. Mandrake and Tubbs lived in a boys' home that Alan worked at 30 years prior. Though they attempt to convince him that this is a happenstance meeting, it's obvious the two specifically tracked Alan down to enact revenge. What did Alan do? Well, the facility Alan worked at subjected the children to torture, verbal abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, and even sexual abuse. Did Alan do any of that? No, he did not. In the mind of these two murderers, though, Alan is just as guilty as the abusers because he didn't do anything to stop it, despite the fact that this was very early in Alan's career, with him being a very young, inexperienced employee. So basically, because Alan didn't do anything, Mandrake and Tubbs thinks it's justified that Alan suffer horrible torture and the complete destruction of his life and family. I thought the big reveal was going to be that the family man raped and abused these two drifters as children, but that's not the case at all. There's no indication that Mandrake and Tubbs had tracked down anyone else from the school. I was waiting for a revelation that Alan became the same abuser he witnessed at the school later on in his career, but that never comes either. Because Alan saw bad things happen and didn't do anything, he is just as guilty as doing it. This logic floors me. No, it's not okay to turn a blind eye to abuse, but given the situation where Alan was a noob at his job and lacking in experience, One might think there would be some kind of slack given to the guy and the focus should be on the real abusers. It's doubtful that these two grubby drifters would have had the resources to track down the rest of the staff in their home, so basically they're focusing all of their rage on one observer. In the mind of the quote-unquote villains of Coming Home in the Dark, Alan is a monster, and it seems the filmmaker feels the same. At least that seems to be what filmmaker James Ashcroft is trying to say, as he even adds a scene where Alan's wife begins looking at him differently after finding out about his lack of action. Maybe Ashcroft is trying to communicate that violence is a never-ending cycle, that the drifters are lashing out against anyone, and there are no innocent parties when abuse is concerned. I can understand some of that, but in the end, the focus of Coming Home in the Dark is absolutely destroying one man, and the punishment definitely does not match the crime he committed. Horror films are often morality tales, where the bad are punished and the good persevere. Unfortunately, Coming Home in the Dark has a much more apocryphal and nihilistic view, which is ever so trendy these days. Please don't learn any life lessons from Coming Home in the Dark. It's brutality for brutality's sake, attempting to wear some kind of moral high ground sheep's clothing. It's capably made, but if you've got a lick of logic in you, it's going to leave you with a rotten taste in your mouth. Repossession is new on demand and digital download from Gravitas Ventures. It's directed and written by Ming Soo Go and Scott C. Hillyard. A 50-year-old man named Jim, played by Gerald Chu, is fired from his longtime job and suffers an existential crisis where he begins hallucinating that he is being followed by a shadowy figure. As the pressure of making ends meet and his damaged pride wear on him, his life, his family, and his world begins to fall apart around him. Well, isn't this a cheery little biscuit? Actually, it's quite the opposite. Sure to depress even the brightest of days, repression lingers on a man whose life is completely falling apart, and just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. Repossession has an undeniably dour and monotonous mood, but in these trying times, I don't know who would think it would be fun to sit and wallow in Jim's midlife crisis with him for an hour and a half. There's no denying that this is a well-made film. The production level is high, the acting is quite good, even though I have never seen any of these actors before. Even the limited number of effects used were used effectively. Technically, this is a good movie through and through. You really feel for Jim's plight. Me being a middle-aged dude, I can empathize with not being old enough to be useless in the workforce, but not young enough to be a hot commodity anymore either. The weight of responsibility is also communicated very well, though at times the drama is laid on pretty thickly. No one would want to trade places with Jim from the way his plight is presented. As Jim's life goes out of control, things get pretty dire, but there's a very long trek to actually get to the horror in this horror drama. Even though the Shadow Man pops in and out of view from time to time, for the most part, it's just Jim sad-sacking about from one predicament to another on his professional and personal decline. Those looking for a thrill a minute are going to have to venture elsewhere. Things don't really pick up the pace until the hour 5 or 10 mark. That's a long time to wallow with anyone. The ending is a powerfully nightmarish one, but it fails to live up to the very long wait for it. With the world crumbling around us daily, I rely on movies to block out all of that. Repossession hit a little too close to home for me, and I think it will a lot of people who are already facing multiple pressures in their life. It's definitely not a bad movie, but it's just bad timing for it. Maybe you're the type who get a cathartic buzz seeing others worse off than you. If so, then Repossession should be next on your watch list. Finally, we have Monsters in the Closet. It's new on-demand digital download from Gravitas Ventures. It's directed and written by the Snygg Brothers. Monsters in the Closet is an anthology story all done by low-budget gurus, the Snygg Brothers, who were responsible for such cinematic delights as Beaster Day, Here Comes Peter Cottonhell, Girl Explores Girl, The Alien Encounter, Bat Babe, The Dark Nighty, The Erotic Witch Project series, and who could forget the heaping bouncy breasts that smothered a midget? While previous films mixed TNA and the genre, this anthology seems to simply embrace the horror and leave the naughty stuff behind. The wraparound story focuses on Yasmin, played by Yasmin Flores, the daughter of a famous writer named Raymond Castle, played by Tom Sikorsky, who returns home to see what her father has been working on before he passed away. Turns out Raymond was mixing black magic with his writing and found a way to make his stories come to life soon after someone reads them. When Yasmin begins reading her father's stories, they begin to terrorize her throughout Raymond's rundown home. While Yasmin is running around the house from zombies, slashers, and invisible monsters, the stories are told to us in anthology form. Please Kill Me Again is not an original zombie story. It basically tells the tale of a woman who is bitten and then becomes a zombie from her point of view. So we get a lot of inner dialogue as if she were still human and watching her body do all of these zombie things. But as the story went on, I found myself truly entertained both by the comedic timing and the punchlines of the dialogue. There's a lot of DIY gore, but honestly I was surprised how fun this first tale was, and it sets the bar pretty high for the rest of the film. The second tale, Home Improvement, was an even bigger surprise. Newlyweds Zeke, played by Luke Cousins, and Maureen, played by Shauna Bess, buy a house but aren't prepared for the amount of fixing this fixer-upper requires. It's fun seeing the loving couple devolve over time into loathing one another. The banter is quick and downright hilarious at times, as the two barely can contain their hatred for each other the more work they have to do on the house. Reminiscent of War of the Roses meets The Money Pit, and ending quite gorily, this is my favorite segment of the film. While decently acted, The One Percenters is probably the weakest story of the bunch. It's about a rich girl who convinces her rich father to allow her to go on a camping trip in the woods with her poor friends. Of course, once she's there, she's miserable. Things take a turn for the worse after a gun mishap. Out in the countryside, the low budget of this production is highlighted even more, unfortunately. Add in some very predictable beats, and I was ready to move on to the next story. Finally, Frankenstein's Wife finishes out this anthology, and surprise, surprise, this one was pretty great as well. Frankenstein's Wife focuses on a not-so-mad scientist named Dr. Frankenstein, played by John Paul Fedele, who accidentally kills his wife, played by Valerie Bittner, yet saves the day by reviving her in his lab. The only thing is Mrs. Frankenstein is horrified by the way she looks and kills herself again. This begins a never-ending cycle of the doc reviving his wife in an even worse-looking state every time, and then her offing herself. This short proves repetition is quite funny, as Mrs. Frankenstein becomes less and less human as the suicides go on. It's wrong humor, but it hit me in the right funny way. This was a darkly whimsical way to end up the collection. The wraparound served its purpose and actually had more thought put into it than most anthologies. Plus, it wasn't unappealing to see the curvaceous and beautiful Yasmin Flores running around the house in skin-tight clothing. Monsters in the Closet is full of schlock and put together on a shoestring budget, but that doesn't mean it's a bad time. I thought a lot of the writing was pretty sharp and witty, and the lo-fi computer blood and gore added another enjoyable layer of cheese. If you're into low-budget horror, you should check this one out. Monsters in the Closet epitomizes everything I love about the do-it-yourself horror genre.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're